Thank you, Catherine, and good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure and my honor this evening to conduct a fireside chat with Ajay Banga, who's the president and CEO of Mastercard. I've known Ajay for over 20 years. We worked together at Citigroup, and I've always admired his leadership. He's one of the great leaders, not just a corporate leader, but great global leaders. And he's even been a greater leader since he's been at Mastercard, and he can show all the stuff that he has. One of the principles that I have, I think many of you in this room know that I like rules and I like principles, and I have a rule of thumb that I use, and I call it the Ajay Banga management rule. And the Ajay Banga management rule is, if I'm ever facing a situation that's really tough, it's confusing, there's a lot of volatility, uncertainty, stress, I ask myself, what would Ajay Banga do? And by asking that question and finding the answer, I always know that I'm going to do the right thing. So with that, come join me, Ajay. Well, I want to again greet Ajay up here. As I said, we've worked together for many, many years, and we are at the Japan Society tonight. And recently, the board of Mastercard had a board meeting in Japan, and I think it would be interesting for you to share with the audience some of your thoughts about your board meeting, what you did in Japan, and why you went there.
So I just want everyone to know that when we were colleagues, he never said that to me, about how there was an Ajay Banga rule. It is mostly about how you don't pay attention to what Ajay says. So you can see he suits his speech to suit the audience in the moment, right? Oh, well, Doug. I have known Doug a long time, so we're old friends. Yes, we did have a board meeting in Japan. We try and do a couple of board meetings outside the United States every year as a way of getting our board members to appreciate the depth and breadth of what's going on overseas in our business. We get more than 60% of our revenue from outside of the United States. And 65% of our employees are based outside of this country. So for us, making sure that the board understands what we're doing and gets to meet people is very important. So Japan was in that context. It has to normally connect with something interesting that's happening in the marketplace. And Doug, as you remember from our own time together, Japan's a market where cash is still king. And that's for all kinds of historical reasons. It has very little to do with education levels or infrastructure. Japan's a country that has all of that in spades. It has to do with lots of cultural reasons around how and why cash is king. But there's a change going on. And the opportunity of that change, it gives us enormous tailwind in our company for where we could go with our business in Japan. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is the timing. Coming up is the Rugby World Cup and the Olympics. Japan is trying definitely put its best foot forward in terms of showing that they can welcome people from overseas to its outstanding culture, its outstanding circumstances. And to do that well, you need to kind of integrate yourself into the global ecosystem. And, a simple example, there's a chip in Japan called the Felica chip, which is what's used for all the contactless taps. Well, that chip is only in Japan. So if you're an overseas tourist coming in for the Olympics or the Rugby World Cup into Japan, and you want to use a card from overseas in Japan to tap at the JR or the subway system, you got a problem. It won't work. So that needs to change if you're going to make people feel welcome when they come for these outstanding events that are going to showcase the best of Japan to the world. And I think we can help there. And those kinds of opportunities are part of what's giving us the tailwind of our business in Japan. So we saw an enormous opportunity. We saw government and companies that are interested in this opportunity. And to tell you the truth, I am very excited about where our business in Japan is going.
Great. Well, one of the themes that you just opened up was the technology theme. And when I meet with other CEOs, whether it's in the United States or around the globe, technology is on the top of their minds. And I know that you've been taking some important leadership positions. But why don't you share with us some of your thoughts about technology disruption, and maybe also see if you can explain to us what blockchain is and what you're doing with it.
Explain what blockchain is. How much time have you got? So, technology. Look, I think technology is at the core of our company. And to tell you the truth, if if we don't embrace technology as a friend, technology will serve to disintermediate our future. But if you embrace it as a friend and you understand it, therefore, for its goods and bads, and you connect with it well at every level of the company, then technology is also our biggest opportunity. And I think that's what we are trying to do inside the company around technology. It's, you've got to be careful that when you do something with technology, you understand that technology is not an end in itself, but is an enabler for meeting needs with consumers or businesses that are currently unmet. If you allow technology to run just for its own sake, my belief is that it creates interesting things, but not necessarily things that are easily commercially applicable or scalable. So that's what we are trying to do. The blockchain is an example of technology that we are experimenting with. We have close to 60 patents in that space today as a company. We've also made investments in blockchain companies, including the Digital Currency Group, that are investing in turn in organizations that are building out blockchain users. I think blockchain's got a real applicability in many parts of industry. Banking's an obvious one, but I think if you look at what the blockchain does, it basically creates the opposite of what today's world works like, which is a centralized ledger. Everything comes into one place to be recorded in banking into debits and credits, into ownership and transfer of ownership, into my buying, your selling, into me holding it, you recording my holding. A distributed ledger allows that same set of transactions to happen in many different places, and therefore, in theory, is more efficient, is scalable, is cheaper in theory, and is safer in theory. The problem is there's in theory everywhere. And the reason for that is it hasn't been tested and proven, one. And two, I know that cybersecurity, anybody who believes that they've figured out the secret sauce for making their cybersecurity system the safest in the world is either on drugs or foolish. One of the two, and they're both pretty bad. Because right now, there are people working on trying to break into everything that you think you're doing to make your system safer. So I'd be careful about thinking that the blockchain is the panacea to everything, but it has enormous potential, and you ignore it at your peril. This is not about cryptocurrency, by the way, which is just a use case for blockchain. But blockchain per se, to me, is very interesting. I'll give you a couple of examples of what we're working on that show you how diverse it could be. So one example could be the proof of provenance. So let's say that Alan McDonald is buying a diamond for his wife, which I hope he's buying regularly. If he's not, I will have a conversation with his wife. But let's assume that diamond was bought, and he wants to make sure that that diamond is not a blood diamond, but has been mined appropriately and correctly in the right kind of country with the right kind of practices. How do you know that today? Very tough to figure it out. But if you could do a proof of provenance on that diamond, from where it is mined, to going to Antwerp, to going to India for refining, to ending up in Alan's house, via De Beers, or via Graph, or somebody else, that using blockchain and QR codes and different messages of tagging a diamond could be really interesting. Similarly, tagging pharmaceuticals for proof of provenance in terms of being not counterfeit or not having crossed borders in an illegal way, or alcohol, or any of that type, or this shirt, to make sure it was made from Egyptian cotton, could you track which bale of Egyptian cotton it came from? Or in the food industry, that particular batch of milk powder, could you track it back to which village in India the milk was collected, which has then got contaminated, and so you could pull those specific 20 cartons of milk out of the market. That, to me, is the power of the blockchain. And I think those business use cases, while they're not yet proven, to ignore them would be a mistake. So I'm very excited about them. We're investing in these. We're in the midst of these proof of provenance kind of pilots. We're in the midst of using the blockchain for cross-border trade and trade financing with a number of banks and merchants. But there's a whole series of things you could do with the blockchain.
Well, as you can see, Ajay is clearly a leader in technology and strategy. But a couple years ago, in 2014, you were named as one of the top global leaders by the Harvard Business Review. In the article, it talks about your people leadership. So I think it'd be great if you could share with us some of your philosophies and practices about being a leader of people.
Does he have a drink before starting these questions? He's on blockchain, technology, people leadership, good behavior. Look, it's very hard to do that in a way that doesn't sound crazy. But I'll tell you, I follow 3 or 4 rules for myself, like your rules. And my first rule is that you're not going to be a good leader if you're not going to listen to people who work for you, with you, and above you. And by listen, I mean really listen. You know, God gave us 2 ears, 2 eyes, and 1 mouth. That's because you should see more than you speak and hear more than you speak. Most people speak more than they see and speak more than they hear. There's something wrong when you have 2 of those and 2 of those and 1 of those, and you operate with 1 of those doing more than 2 of those and 2 of those. It's kind of simple philosophy of leadership, but it actually means a lot. And you can't see my ears, they're hidden. But they're there, trust me. They're there. And I want to make sure you take that with the seriousness of intent, meaning on the other side of this is if you're into technology, procrastination is not your friend. Because the change around us in our industry is enormous. It's at warp speed. And procrastination kills you in this industry. So change is coming at you all the time, and you need to have a sense of urgency around it. But a sense of urgency does not mean that you cannot listen. A sense of urgency means you listen, and then you make up your mind quickly, as compared to you don't listen, and you take time to make up your mind. That's kind of what I mean about balancing urgency and listening as 2 sides of this coin. I think if you don't do that, then people who work for you will never look up to you because they will disconnect from you because they don't find in you someone who cares about their opinion but is willing to take a call and make a choice, make a decision. You know, there's no perfect information in life, and we've both been bankers for many years, and the whole thing about banking is a risk-reward equation. If you had no risk, you'd make no money. You make money because you take a risk. The question is, can you take a thoughtful risk or a not so thoughtful risk? But there's a risk. You're never going to have complete information. So the sense of urgency combined with listening, combined with the willingness to take a thoughtful risk and allow mistakes to happen within the parameters of a thoughtful risk are part of being a leader in today's world. And I think these are the guiding principles that I care about. I care about one more very deeply, which is that a lot of people, you know, when I was young, we used to talk about IQ, that your IQ determined your success. And somewhere along the line, it became fashionable to talk about EQ. And so your EQ and your IQ together made you a thoughtful manager. And I believe it's real time for us, and in our company we talk about this all the time, it's real time for us to talk about our DQ. And our DQ is not Warren Buffett's Dairy Queen, although that's cool. It is actually Decency Quotient. So your Decency Quotient is what you bring to work every day. It's bringing your heart and your mind to work. It's inspiring the people who work for you to believe that they can trust you, that your hand is on their back and not in their face, that they can come to you when they have a problem and they won't get shouted at just because they have a problem, that good news should take the staircase and bad news should take the elevator, because that's what a boss is for. That is what I believe is this whole thing. Right? And I do it well sometimes, and I don't do it well sometimes. So I would tell you that there are moments when I don't live up to these rules of my own. And I shout at people when I shouldn't be shouting at them. Or I get upset with somebody when I shouldn't. But I can recognize it when I'm doing it. And I'm trying always to live up to this, that I will listen to you, I will behave with a sense of urgency, I will take thoughtful risks, I will not shoot you if you make an honest mistake, and I will do my very, very best to always show you that I have DQ in addition to IQ and EQ. So that's my rules.
Great. That's a very illuminating. Thank you. So one of the other themes related to that is diversity, and and women. You've been known as somebody who has not just promoted, but also developed and trained and mentored women. You've also worked for great women leaders. Can you share with us some of the thoughts about why your organization has done so well in the diversity quotient?
Diversity to me is more than women. I want to start with that. Diversity actually is diversity of thought and experience and background sitting next to me at work. And we work together in our management team. If everywhere I had gone, I had taken with me the people who worked with me in the past and surrounded myself only with the people I knew whom I'd grown up with or worked with or gone to school with, well, then we'll all have the same blind spots and we'll all make the same mistakes. And if you have the same blind spots and you make the same mistakes, that's kind of a recipe for being an idiot. And so the issue really is, if you don't want to be an idiot and you want to succeed, then you better surround yourself with people who didn't go to the same schools as you, didn't grow up in the same towns as you, didn't work in the same companies as you, haven't had the same experiences as you, and by the richness of their experiences, you live a better life. That, to me, is real diversity. If you do that well, you will end up with people who are of different ethnicities, are of gender variance, have different sexual orientations, and have different experiences, and that is the value of diversity. So I'm diverse myself. I don't look like anybody else in this room. I recognize that. But if somebody told me I got my job because I look different from you, I would quit. I will leave in one heartbeat because my self-respect matters to me as much as my job does. And so I think we do a disservice when we translate diversity into things of that type when we talk about it. I want this lady to work for me and succeed because she is really good at her work. What I have to do is to open the door for her to have a level playing field. I think the odds are stacked against her, unfortunately. I can open the door to give her a level playing field, but she has to win her job. Otherwise, how's she going to have self-respect? So that, to me, is the charm of diversity. Done the right way, it's the most powerful thing in the world. Done the wrong way, it is awful for everybody. And so for me, why women and why the topic of women? One, I have a wife and 2 girls at home, and I'm outnumbered. So it's kind of a, and so you kind of learn very quickly. Doug's a friend of my family, so he knows this to be true. I'm outnumbered, actually without the girls. My wife alone outnumbers me. When you add my 2 daughters, that's about 27 against 1. So I learned long back that you don't fight with bad odds. So the ability to say, yes, dear, with your head tilted at just the right angle of civility is something I have picked up over the years. That has carried over into my work life. And so I'm a believer, by the way, and all the jokes aside, I'm just a believer that how can you not have the power of what women bring to your workforce used to its full extent? You got 50% of the population, right? And you got 50% of the population, which is educated. My wife and I were educated in the same business school. We were classmates. I see no reason or no logic as to why she cannot do as well as I could. And so I don't understand the logic of surrounding myself with half the population that could add value to me not being in my orbit. It makes no sense. Now, it's hard because you can change this by artificially filling your senior-most management positions with women by biasing the recruiting to suit them, or you can do it the right way, like I was trying to describe. Open the door, create a level playing field, and let her win her job in there. I'm trying my best to do both, and I probably screw up along the way a few times, but I'm really trying hard. And it's an ongoing journey, and we're making progress. We do it with our board. One of my board members is right here, a lady, as it happens to be, Merit Jano. And in our board, we're trying to ensure that we have the right representation of gender, but even more important, the right representation of skills and thinking, and then the diversity of gender as well. And that's how we think about it, right from the board all the way to every employee. Give me your skills, give me your mind, give me your heart. I will give you a level playing field, and I hope like hell you win. Great.
Ajay, there's also another a set of people around the world who don't have the same opportunities that people like us have in this room and the kind of companies we work for. And you've shown incredible compassion, and you're investing in programs around the world to help those that really don't have the opportunities, the people that are very poor, that do not have the kind of inclusion. Can you give us some of your thoughts about how you're working on that with Mastercard as well as on your own personal time?
Yeah. I mean, we stumbled into this, to be truthful. There's some part of it that was organized. When our IPO happened 10 years ago, we were owned by the banks, and the banks actually took 12.5% of their stock holding and created a foundation, which at the time of our IPO, the IPO market cap of the company was $5 billion. We closed today at $210 billion, 10 years later, right? And so in these 10 years, that foundation has gone from being a relatively small foundation to now you put Rockefeller and Ford Foundation together and you don't get to the size of our foundation. So that is by design, the creation of the foundation. But I believe that there's not enough foundation money in the world to solve the problems that the world has ahead of it. There just isn't enough money in philanthropy to solve for inclusive growth, for example, where 2 billion people in the world do not have access to what you and I take for granted, which is an identity and a bank account, so you don't have to stand in a queue to pay your water bill or your electricity bill or to save money or to get access to insurance if you can't go to work for 10 days. Those things, 2 billion people in the world don't have those. You can't solve that with the Mastercard Foundation's money or the Gates Foundation money or the Rockefeller Foundation. There's just not enough money. But you can solve it if private capital, ingenuity, technology, and resources are brought to bear in a sustainable way to fight this thing. And the only way you'll do that is if you make it part of your business model, one, which means you have to make a return on it. If you don't make a return on it, it's not sustainable. That return can be smaller. It can be patient capital, meaning you could buy time for having that return come through, but zero return or no return is not how you can get private capital and ingenuity and resources to focus on the world's problems. That part I stumbled into. I had no idea of how important that was 9 years ago when I joined the company. We started out with a very commercial motive, which was 85% of the world's retail transactions were still in cash. And so we were trying to target cash. And we discovered that the government is the single largest originator of cash in almost every economy. And what were they doing? They were using the cash to give it as social benefits to their citizenry or distributing salaries to their employees and so on. And so to try to get, and we also discovered that that social benefits of any type, 42% of social benefits on the average do not reach the recipient they were intended for. In the NGO world, that's called leakage. In my world, it's called theft. And 42%, this is a real number, does not reach. So if the government generates the most cash for its citizenry, either directly or through programs that are meant to benefit people like the World Food Program or the UN or the IMF or any form, and if 42% of what's meant to be reaching these people does not reach, we have a problem. And one of the ways to fix that problem is to take out all the middlemen who play in that game, because that's where the sticky fingers are. And if you can take out the middlemen, you can help to create a manner by which, instead of 42% getting lost, 42% more people get what they should get. That is what we stumbled into. And that led to our whole effort around trying to get people to be able to be part of the financial system. So to give you an example, refugees from Syria who come to Lebanon and Jordan, they would receive food from the World Food Program. The way it used to work was you would buy grain in the United States, ship it, and then transport it by truck into Lebanon. Along the way, many transshipments, many sticky fingers. And then when it reached there, you would distribute grain to these people in the camp. And as you know, man does not live on grain alone. You need vegetables and dairy and other things. And so they would in turn sell part of the grain to get the liquid cash to be able to buy vegetables and dairy, which meant that you were screwing up the local market by introducing lower-priced grain of very high quality into the black market. So even local businessmen were getting disrupted. So nothing was right with the program, but we were doing it. And US taxpayer money was being used for it. So we went to the World Food Program and said, why don't you issue an identity to that individual, which is a phone, a card, a fingerprint, bump your head, whatever you like doing. And we will enable that instrument to only be used in the shops in the camp that you certify as appropriate. In other words, you can't buy booze, you can't buy other stuff, but you can buy grain and meat and vegetables and dairy. And tell us how much money you want to give the person, put it on the card, and we'll make sure it works. We've now done that for 2.3 million refugees. We've saved the World Food Program between 35 and 42% of the money that is being eaten by sticky fingers. Simple. Now, it wasn't. Don't clap. Trust me, I had no idea I was doing this when I started out doing this. I was doing it for purely commercial purposes. But I'm trying to make a point, which is in doing well, you can do good at the same time. Now I've figured out I can actually do this. So a few years back at a World Bank spring meeting, I very rashly on stage with Queen Maxima and Jim Kim made a commitment to reach 500 million people by the year 2020 to get them financially included. There were about 15, 16 Mastercard people in the audience. I could see them all saying, he is such a crazy guy. He must be, what is he saying? And when I got off the stage, 2 of them came to me and said, what did you just say, 500 million? I said, yeah. They said, how do you plan to get it done? I said, no, you'll figure it out. A boss has the benefit of saying whatever the hell he wants, and other people have to go running around figuring out how to get it done. The good news is, it's now 2018, we've reached 350 million. Right? And I'm telling you, we will get to 500 million, but it's not by ourselves. It's with banks, with mobile telephone operators, with governments. It's a whole ecosystem, skunk works of partnerships we're doing. It's a long answer to your question, Doug. What I'm trying to tell you is, it's not philanthropy and it's not altruism. True change will come if we can get our business models to be adapted in a way to the use of doing good and doing well at the same time, as compared to the unnatural act of just writing checks. That's what I'm trying to do.
Well, Ajay, on behalf of the Japan Society, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. And I think everyone here now knows why I have the Ajay Banga management role. Thank you very much.
Thank you.